The rain poured hard that night, cold and merciless. As if the whole sky was crying, the streets were almost empty. Only the sound of water hitting the ground echoed between the broken buildings. Neon lights flickered weakly outside the old market. Most shops were closed, shutters rattling in the wind. Thomas, a tired Earthling man in his late 30s, walked home after finishing another long shift. He worked at a repair shop, fixing machines no one cared about anymore. Life was hard, money was never enough, and yet something in his heart always made him stop when he saw others in need. That night something caught his eye. Near the corner of the market, under a rusty sign, two small shapes crouched together. He almost thought they were stray animals, but when the lightning flashed across the sky, he froze. They were children, two thin figures, holding each other tightly, their clothes torn, their hair soaked with rain, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Thomas's steps slowed. He was used to seeing beggars in the city, but these two were different. Their faces were pale, almost too pale. Their skin carried a strange shimmer under the streetlight, and their ears, slightly pointed, gave away the truth. These were not human children. They were aliens. The twins looked no older than 10, maybe younger. One was a boy with messy silver hair sticking to his forehead. The other was a girl with the same strange silver hair, clinging to his arm like her life depended on it. Both stared at Thomas with wide eyes, half fear, half hope. They whispered something in a language he could not understand, their voices trembling. Thomas felt his chest tighten. He had heard stories, aliens wandering the galaxy, some poor, some hunted. But Earth was not a kind place for outsiders, especially poor ones. If the wrong people saw these children, they would be taken, locked away, maybe sold, maybe worse. The boy raised a shaky hand and spoke again. His voice was weak, but one word slipped out clear in broken English: help. Thomas swallowed hard. Every instinct told him to walk away, to pretend he saw nothing. He already had enough problems, debts, bills, and a tiny apartment barely enough for one man. But something in their eyes stopped him. They weren't just hungry. They weren't just lost, they were desperate, like children hiding from a monster. The girl shivered violently, coughing as rain dripped from her chin. Her small hand held onto her brother's shirt, and Thomas noticed bruises on her wrist. Someone had hurt them. Someone had left them out here to die. Do you have anyone? Family? Thomas asked softly, even though he knew they didn't understand. The boy shook his head quickly, pulling his sister closer. His glowing eyes darted left and right as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. A car passed by on the wet road. Splashing water onto the sidewalk, the children flinched, pressing themselves tighter against the wall. That small movement broke the last of Thomas's hesitation. All right, he whispered to himself, you can't stay here. He crouched down, extending a hand. At first the twins shrank back, fear written all over their faces. But Thomas kept his voice gentle. It's okay, I won't hurt you, slowly. The boy let go of his sister and touched Thomas's hand. His fingers were cold, too cold, and his nails faintly glowed under the rain. It was the strangest thing Thomas had ever seen. But instead of pulling away, he carefully helped the boy stand, then lifted the girl into his arms. The girl's head rested weakly on his shoulder. For the first time, she whispered something in her alien tongue that sounded almost like safe. Thomas felt a strange weight in his chest, a responsibility he had never asked for. Yet he couldn't ignore it, not now. The walk back to his apartment felt endless. Rain soaked his jacket. His shoes splashed through puddles, but he didn't stop. The twins were too light in his arms, as if they hadn't eaten properly in weeks. Every step he took, he wondered if he was making a mistake. What if the authorities found out? What if someone came looking for them? What if they weren't children at all, but something far more dangerous? By the time he reached his building, his mind was a storm. But then the girl coughed softly against his neck, and the boy clung tighter to his arm. In that moment, his doubts faded. They weren't dangerous. They were just lost kids who needed someone. Inside his small apartment, Thomas set them down on an old couch. The twins sat side by side, dripping water onto the floor, shivering silently. He gave them towels, a blanket, and the last bit of bread he had on the table. The children grabbed the food with shaky hands, eating like they hadn't tasted anything in days. As Thomas watched them, he felt an uneasy thought creep into his mind. Who were they really? Why were they on Earth, alone and abandoned? And why did their glowing eyes look so much like fear? Fear of being found. The storm raged outside. But inside the small room, a fragile silence grew. The human man sat across the alien twins, knowing his life had just changed forever. And in the shadows of the night, far above the earth, something unseen moved. Ships watching, searching, waiting. The twins were not safe. Not yet, but for this night they belonged to him. And he had no idea that the children he had just taken in carried a secret that could shake the galaxy. The night had passed slowly. Rain kept hitting the window of the small apartment. Thomas did not sleep much. He kept waking up, listening for the children. Sometimes he heard whispers, soft and strange, a language that rolled like wind through trees. Other times, he heard the girl's quiet sobs and the boy's voice calming her. It felt unreal. 2 alien children sleeping in his living room while the world outside had no idea. Morning came dull and gray. Thomas stood in the kitchen, making a simple breakfast: bread, eggs, and tea. His cupboard was almost empty. His money was nearly gone. But when he looked at the couch and saw the twins huddled under the blanket, sleeping close together, he sighed. He could not send them away now. The girl woke first, blinking slowly, her glowing eyes adjusting to the light. She looked around with fear, as if she expected chains or cages. But when she saw Thomas holding out a plate of warm bread, she froze. Her brother stirred awake and sat up quickly. Pulling her close, both stared at the food, confused, as though they had never been offered something without cost. "Eat," Thomas said softly. Pushing the plate closer, the boy hesitated, then slowly reached for the bread, breaking it in half and giving the larger piece to his sister. They ate quietly, their small hands trembling, watching them. Thomas felt both sorrow and curiosity. Who had raised them? Why did they act as if kindness was a trap? When their bellies were a little full, Thomas tried again. "What's your name?" he asked, tapping his chest. "Thomas." The boy stared, then pointed weakly at himself. "Kyle." He pointed at his sister. "Lyra." Thomas repeated their names slowly. Kale and Lyra, and for the first time the boy gave a faint nod of approval. At least now they were no longer strangers. The day moved on, but strange things began to happen. When Thomas turned on his small radio, static filled the room. The twins flinched as if the sound hurt them. Kale reached out, touched the metal box, and instantly the static vanished. A clear voice came through, sharper than Thomas had ever heard before. He blinked in shock, but Kale pulled his hand back quickly, as though he had done something he should not later. When Thomas gave Lyra a pencil and paper to keep her busy, she began to draw. Her small hands moved quickly, drawing shapes Thomas had never seen before, circles inside circles, symbols that looked like stars, and lines that seemed like maps. She didn't even look at the paper, as if her hand remembered something her mind had tried to forget. When Thomas leaned closer, he noticed one symbol repeated again and again. It looked like a crown. "Where did you learn this?" Thomas asked gently. But Lyra shook her head and hid the paper under the blanket. Her eyes filled with fear, not pride. It was clear she was not supposed to share it. That night, Thomas tucked them into the couch again. But not long after, he heard Kale wake with a scream. Thomas rushed over and found the boy shaking, sweat on his forehead. He kept whispering one word, over and over: "Hunters." "Hunters?" Lyra cried softly, holding his hand. Thomas knelt beside them, not knowing what hunters meant but feeling the weight of the word all the same. The following days only deepened the mystery. Thomas tried to take them outside once, just for air. But the moment they saw the open street, Kale's hand gripped his tightly and Lyra clung to his coat. They scanned every shadow, every stranger, as though expecting death to leap out. They weren't just hiding from hunger. They were hiding from someone who wanted them back. That evening, Thomas washed their clothes. The fabric was strange, soft yet tough, stitched with patterns he didn't recognize. As he turned one sleeve inside out, his eyes widened. On the inner seam, half hidden under dirt, was a small embroidered crest. It was a circle with 3 stars above it. And within the circle, the same crown shape Lyra had drawn. His hands trembled as he traced the symbol. This was no random mark. This was something important, something old. He searched on his old computer, typing "alien crest 3 stars crown." Most results were nonsense conspiracy forums, but one link made his blood run cold. It was from a classified archive leak, a blurry picture of an alien council meeting decades ago. On the banner behind the council was the same crest, the royal seal of a powerful alien dynasty, a dynasty thought to be destroyed, wiped out in a brutal war. Thomas looked back at the twins sleeping on his couch. Cale's arm around Lyra protectively, her small hand clutching his shirt. The truth pressed down on him like a weight. They weren't just orphans. They were the last of something bigger, something dangerous to be connected with. Suddenly he heard a faint hum outside the window. He peered through the curtains and froze. In the night sky above the city, a small light moved silently. Too steady to be an airplane, too smooth to be a drone, it hovered. Then faded into the clouds. Thomas's heart pounded. He knew without proof someone was searching, and the twins were the ones being hunted. He sat by the window all night, clutching a metal wrench like it could defend against the universe. He had taken in 2 children thinking they were just lost and hungry. But now secrets hung over them like storm clouds, secrets that whispered of crowns, hunters, and an empire that would kill to erase its heirs. And in the silence of his small apartment, Thomas realized something frightening by choosing to shelter the twins. He had already stepped into a story far bigger than himself, a story the galaxy would not let him walk away from. Thomas sat at his small desk staring at the glowing screen. The crest he had found inside Cale and Lyra's clothes glared back at him from the old archive photo. 3 stars above a crown, the same symbol Lyra had drawn again and again without knowing why. His gut twisted because this wasn't just a child's sketch. This was the seal of a dynasty. Once rulers of whole star systems thought to be dead and buried. He looked back at the couch where the twins lay asleep. Cale's arm was wrapped tightly around Lyra, as if she was the last thing in the world he could protect. Thomas rubbed his face, whispering under his breath, "What have I done?" He had taken them in thinking they were lost kids, maybe runaways. Now it felt like he had opened his door to the galaxy's most dangerous secret. The next morning, Thomas tried to act normal.
He cooked a thin soup, gave the children bread, and even smiled.
But every time Cale's glowing eyes met his, the image of the royal crest burned in his mind. He wanted to ask, to demand answers, but he knew they were too afraid to tell. So he stayed quiet, watching, waiting. Lyra drew again that afternoon, her little hands moving quickly over paper. This time the shapes weren't just stars. She drew a massive throne room with tall pillars, creatures kneeling before 2 small figures, and in the middle the crest again, glowing like fire. When she saw Thomas looking, she quickly covered the page, her eyes wide with guilt. "Lyra," he whispered, "why do you keep drawing this?" The girl shook her head, pressing the paper to her chest as tears filled her eyes. Kyle stepped between them, his small body standing firm, his voice low. "No." "Secret?" That one English word chilled Thomas. Secret. The children knew more than they were willing to admit, and whatever it was heavy enough to make them tremble at the thought of speaking it aloud. That night the air outside was strangely quiet. Thomas went to throw trash near the alley when he noticed 2 men standing too long at the corner. Their clothes were dark, their eyes sharp, their movements careful when they noticed him watching. They turned away too quickly, melting into the rain. Thomas's stomach tightened. Were they hunters? Spies? Or worse, human agents who had seen the crest online? He hurried back upstairs and locked the door. Cale was awake, sitting by the window with a stiff expression, the boy's small hand pressed against the glass, his glowing eyes staring out at the night. Thomas walked closer. "What are you looking for?" Cale whispered one word again. "Hunters." The boy's voice cracked with fear, but his eyes burned with something else too, defiance. The days became tense. Thomas noticed Cale's strength wasn't normal for his age. When the rusty heater broke, Cale touched it lightly, and sparks danced across his fingers until the machine hummed back to life. Lyra once spilled a cup of water, and with a wave of her small hand, the drops floated for a second before falling again. They had powers, faint but real, and Thomas realized these weren't just children of royalty. They carried something inside them, something the hunters would never stop chasing. One evening, Thomas made the mistake of searching the crest again. This time, the screen filled with warnings. Access restricted, unauthorized inquiry. His blood ran cold. It wasn't a random archive anymore. Someone was monitoring. Within minutes, his old computer buzzed, the screen going black when it lit up again. A message flashed. "We are coming. Do not hide what is ours." Thomas slammed the laptop shut. His heart pounding, the twins stared at him. Fear in their glowing eyes. Lyra grabbed his sleeve, whispering fast in her alien tongue, her voice shaking like she was praying. Kyle clenched his fists, stepping in front of her. "Safe." he asked Thomas, his English rough but desperate. Thomas looked at them both, his throat dry. Yes, he whispered, though he wasn't sure anymore. I'll keep you safe. That night, the dreams came. Thomas woke to the sound of Cale crying out. The boy thrashed on the couch. Sweat running down his face, Lyra clung to him, crying softly, Cale, Cale. When Thomas shook him awake, Cale gasped, his glowing eyes full of terror. They come, he stammered. Then he pointed at the mark sewn into his sister's torn shirt, the crest, and whispered the word again. Royal! Thomas froze. The children had spoken the truth without meaning to, royal heirs. The crest wasn't just a symbol, it was their birthright, their curse. The hunters weren't chasing random orphans. They were chasing the last living heirs of a throne drenched in blood. Outside the window, the faint hum returned. This time it was louder, closer. Thomas pushed the curtain aside and his breath caught. A sleek ship hovered above the distant skyline. Silent, predatory. Its light swept across the buildings like eyes searching in the dark. Cale stood beside him, his small hand gripping Thomas's tightly. Father, the boy whispered suddenly. The word awkward but full of need. Thomas's chest ached. He had never been anyone's father, but in this moment, he understood what the children were asking. Not just protection, not just food. They wanted him to stand against the galaxy itself. The mark of royalty burned like fire in his mind. He had thought his life was small, meaningless, but now, sitting in his cramped apartment with 2 alien children clinging to him, he realized something terrifying. He was caught in the center of a storm, and the galaxy would soon come knocking on his door. The silence of the night was broken by a low hum. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't the wind, it was something colder, sharper, a sound that made the skin crawl. Thomas froze by the window, staring at the faint glow of a ship moving silently above the city skyline. His heart hammered. Kyle had been right. The hunters were here. He quickly closed the curtains. Pulling the twins close, "Stay quiet," he whispered. His voice tight with fear, Cale clutched Lyra's hand, his glowing eyes darting to the door. Lyra pressed her face into Thomas's sleeve, whispering a prayer in her alien tongue. The room felt smaller, the shadows thicker, as if the whole world was watching. Waiting for hours, Thomas sat awake, a wrench in his hands, his ears straining for any sound outside. Every creak of the building made him jump. Every car passing in the street below felt like a threat. But the worst was the silence that followed. The kind of silence that meant someone was hiding, listening. By morning, the ship was gone from the sky, but unease stayed. Thomas decided to take the twins out for supplies, carefully, quietly. He pulled up their hoods and told them to keep close. They obeyed without a word. Their small hands gripping his coat tightly at the market. Thomas noticed them again, men standing too long near corners. Their eyes hidden under caps, their movements too controlled. When Cale caught sight of one, he flinched, pulling Lyra behind him. Thomas's chest tightened. Who were these people? Hunters from space? Or humans working with them? They left quickly, carrying only a loaf of bread and a bottle of water. On the way back, Thomas felt it, a shadow following. He didn't look back, but every step echoed wrong. Too measured, when they turned a corner, he pulled the twins into a narrow alley, pressing them against the wall. The figure walked past, slow, scanning. Thomas held his breath until the man vanished into the crowd. Lyra shook in his arms. Cale's fists clenched so hard his nails drew blood. Back in the apartment, Thomas locked the door and pulled a chair against it. He tried to calm the twins, but Cale's glowing eyes stayed fixed on the door. They know, Cale whispered in broken English. They smell us, Thomas frowned. Smell you? Cale nodded, his small chest rising and falling fast. Hunters always smell. That night, the first real knock came. 3 sharp raps on the door. Thomas froze. No one visited him, ever. He grabbed the wrench, motioned for the twins to stay quiet, and crept closer through the peephole. He saw nothing but a shadow, tall and still. When he didn't answer, the shadow leaned closer to the door, and a strange voice whispered, "Give them back, human. They are not yours." Thomas's blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't human, it was too smooth, too cold, echoing like metal scraping stone. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Then silence. When he dared to look again, the shadow was gone. Cale's eyes glowed brighter, his small body shaking with rage. "Hunters," he said, his voice trembling. "Here." Lyra hid her face, whispering, "Safe. Father, safe." Her voice broke, and Thomas realized she was begging him not to give them away. As if she already knew most adults in his place would. That night's sleep was impossible. Thomas sat by the window watching the street. He saw them, shadows moving at the edge of sight, disappearing when headlights passed. The hunters weren't just searching randomly. They were circling, closing in. The following day brought more signs. When Thomas returned from the market, his door was slightly open. His heart raced as he pushed it wide. Inside, nothing was stolen. But everything was touched, moved slightly. The blanket folded differently. The bread box left open. Someone had been inside. The twins clung to him when he told them, their fear almost unbearable to see that evening. The hunters made their presence clearer. Thomas heard strange clicks outside, like claws on metal. When he peered through the blinds, he saw glowing eyes in the dark, too low, too wide set to be human. His stomach twisted. The hunters weren't just people in shadows. They were something far worse. He closed the blinds quickly, his breath shaking. The twins sat huddled on the couch, Cale's arm wrapped tightly around Lyra. They didn't ask questions, they didn't need to. They already knew. The hunters had found them. Thomas looked at his small apartment, at the broken heater, the thin walls, the locked door. None of it would stop what was coming, and yet, when Cale whispered, "Father, safe," and Lyra pressed her small hand into his, he found his answer. He wasn't going to hand them over. No matter what, he would fight as the night grew deep. Thomas noticed something across the street. In a window directly facing his, a red light blinked once, then again. Not random, not a reflection. It was a signal watching him, marking his place. The hunters were no longer in the shadows. They had chosen their prey, and Thomas realized with a cold weight in his chest. The real fight hadn't even begun yet. The city never truly slept, but Thomas's apartment felt like a trapped cage. Every sound outside, the distant car horns, the creak of footsteps on the stairs, the buzz of old lights, kept him awake. The twins huddled together on the couch, their glowing eyes staring into the dark. Kyle was silent, too silent for a boy his age, and Lyra kept whispering soft words in her alien tongue, as if praying to gods Thomas could never know by now. Thomas had accepted one truth: the hunters were real, and they were closing in. But what he had not yet accepted was why. Why were these two children so important? Why would entire ships and shadows stalk Earth just to find them? The answer came when Thomas least expected it. It was late evening when someone knocked at his door again. This time the knock was softer, slower, almost polite. Thomas grabbed the wrench, motioned for the twins to stay hidden, and approached. Through the peephole he saw something strange. An old man stood outside, tall but frail-looking, dressed in a long, dark coat that shimmered faintly under the hall light. His eyes were not human. They glowed faint gold. And when he spoke, his voice was not the cold hiss of a hunter, but deep, tired, and heavy with sorrow. "I mean no harm," the man said softly. "I have come for them, but not as the hunters do." Thomas's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at him not to open the door. But before he could decide, Cale's voice came from behind him. Trembling, "Arendor." Thomas turned in shock. Cale rarely spoke, and never a word that sounded so familiar, so heavy. The boy stepped forward, his small body shaking, his eyes glowing brighter than before. Lyra clung to him, whispering the same name. Arendor. Thomas's chest tightened. Whoever this man was, the twins knew him. Against every fear in his body, Thomas unlocked the door. The old man stepped inside slowly, his eyes softening as he saw the twins. He dropped to one knee, not before Thomas. Not before anyone else, but before Cale and Lyra. And to Thomas's utter shock, the old man bowed, pressing his forehead to the ground. "My heirs," he whispered, his voice breaking. "By the stars you live." Thomas's stomach dropped, his mind spinning. He looked at the twins, two small children, thin and scared, holding on to each other. And then he looked at the old man, kneeling before them as if before kings. "What are you talking about?" Thomas demanded, his voice rough. The man lifted his head slowly, tears glistening in his golden eyes. "They are not strays, not beggars, not orphans. They are the last blood of the Astraean Empire, the royal heirs of a throne that countless died to protect." The words hit Thomas like a hammer. He shook his head. "That's impossible. They're just kids." "No," Arendor cut him off, his voice firm now. "They are Cale, son of the Lost King, and Lyra, daughter of the fallen queen. The hunters seek them because their blood carries the right to rule. And if they die, the last hope of the Astran people dies with them. Thomas stumbled back, his wrench nearly slipping from his hand. His mind refused to believe it, but deep inside he already knew. The glowing eyes, the strange powers, the crest stitched into their clothes. The dreams, the fear, the hunters, it all made sense now. Lyra's eyes filled with tears as she whispered something in her tongue. Arendor replied gently, his voice soothing. Then he looked at Thomas and said, "She asked if you know, if you will still keep them now that you understand who they truly are." Thomas's throat tightened. The twins were staring at him, waiting. Cale's small hand gripped his sister's tightly, his glowing eyes searching Thomas's face. Would he turn away now, like everyone else had? Would he hand them over now that the danger was too great? Thomas dropped the wrench. He knelt down in front of them and placed a hand on Cale's shoulder. "I don't care if you're kings, queens, or just kids, you're mine now. And I'll protect you." Lyra broke into sobs, burying her face in Thomas's chest. Cale stayed stiff, but his trembling stopped. For the first time, he let out a shaky breath, almost like relief. Arendor bowed his head deeply, his voice soft. "Then you are braver than most humans I have ever known. But you must understand, the hunters will not stop. They are sworn to erase this bloodline forever. You have taken into your home not just children, but the future of a fallen empire." Suddenly, a noise thundered outside. The building shook. Windows rattling, Arendor's head snapped up, his golden eyes narrowing. "They have found us," he said quickly. Lyra gasped. Cale stepped forward, his eyes glowing brighter than ever before. And Thomas realized his small apartment was about to become the center of a war far bigger than Earth itself. Through the window, Thomas saw the street flood with shadows. Figures moved with inhuman speed, their eyes glowing red, their limbs long and twisted. Hunters, dozens of them, closing in. Arendor pulled a strange staff from his coat, its surface glowing with alien runes. He looked at Thomas, his voice urgent. "You swore to protect them, then stand ready for tonight. The galaxy comes for your children." Thomas gripped the wrench tighter, his chest pounding with fear and resolve. The twins stood behind him, their glowing eyes no longer just frightened, but burning with something deeper, something royal, and in that moment, Thomas understood. The children he had taken in were not only his responsibility. They were heirs, they were hope, and the hunters would have to step over his dead body to touch them. The apartment walls shook as if the building itself was alive and afraid. Outside, the hunters' shadows moved through the streets, their glowing red eyes sweeping every corner. Thomas gripped his wrench so tightly his knuckles turned white. His breath ragged. He had never fought in wars, never faced anything bigger than unpaid bills, but tonight, the fate of 2 children, and maybe much more, rested in his hands. Arendor stood tall in the center of the room, his staff glowing with alien runes. Cale and Lyra huddled close behind Thomas, their small bodies trembling. Yet their glowing eyes carried something fierce. They were no longer just children hiding in the rain. They were heirs, royalty, the last of a broken empire, and Thomas. Thomas was the only shield between them and the galaxy's killers. Arendor's voice was grave. "Steady. Human, the hunters do not stop. They have tracked these children across star systems. If you give them up now, you might save yourself, but if you fight, you may die before the sun rises." The words cut deep. Thomas looked at the twins, Cale clutching Lyra's hand, Lyra whispering prayers he couldn't understand. Fear flashed in their eyes. But deeper than fear was something else, trust. They trusted him, a stranger, more than they trusted the galaxy that wanted them dead. His chest burned with conflict. Logic screamed at him to surrender, to hand them over before it was too late. What could one man do against hunters that moved like shadows, ships that hummed in the skies, and enemies who wanted bloodlines erased? But his heart, stubborn and human, refused. He remembered the night he found them, 2 shivering figures, whispering help in the rain. He remembered Lyra's tears when he gave her bread, Cale's trembling voice asking, "Safe?" He had promised them safety, and to break that promise now would mean breaking himself. The building groaned as if it knew a storm was coming. Then the sound of claws scratching against the hallway door pierced the silence. The hunters were here, Cale gasped, his glowing eyes wide. Lyra buried her face into Thomas's sleeve, whispering, "Father, don't leave." The word father hit him harder than the pounding on the door. He wasn't their blood, but in this moment he was all they had. Thomas stood straighter. "I won't hand them over," he said, his voice steady despite the fear burning inside. Arendor's golden eyes widened slightly as if surprised. You would stand against them? You, a single man? Thomas tightened his grip on the wrench. I'm not standing against the galaxy. I'm standing for them. The old alien gave a slow nod, respect glinting in his weary eyes. So be it, he said. Tonight you choose humanity's place in their story, and perhaps it will not be forgotten. The door shook violently, cracks appearing in the frame. A deep hiss echoed from the other side, the hunters speaking in their inhuman tongue. Thomas pushed the twins behind him, his heart thundered. But he did not move back. If death was coming, it would have to face him first. Suddenly, the door burst open. Dark figures poured inside, their limbs long, their red eyes burning like coals. The room filled with the smell of metal and ash. Thomas swung his wrench wildly, catching one across the head. The creature hissed, staggering back, but another lunged forward. Claws slicing across the wall, Arendor's staff lit up, blasting arcs of energy that threw hunters back against the walls. The twins clung to each other, Lyra crying out, Kale's eyes glowing brighter with each scream. Thomas fought like a desperate animal, swinging, blocking, shoving. Every strike felt useless against monsters bred for killing, but he refused to stop. This was not about winning, it was about keeping his promise. A hunter slammed him against the wall, claws digging into his arm. Pain shot through him, but before it could finish him, Kale screamed. The boy's small hand flared with light, a blast of raw energy knocking the hunter away. Thomas fell to his knees, gasping, staring at Kale. The boy was shaking, terrified, but his power had saved him. Arendor shouted over the chaos, Do you see, human? Their blood carries the crown's fire. The hunters will never stop until that fire is snuffed out. Your choice is final. Give them, or fight with them. Thomas wiped blood from his mouth. Pushing himself to his feet, his voice was hoarse, but filled with iron. They're mine now, and if the galaxy wants them, it can come through me first, the hunters hissed in unison. Their red eyes narrowing, Thomas stood in front of the twins. Battered, bleeding but unyielding, Kale and Lyra pressed close to his back, their glowing eyes burning brighter for the first time. They weren't just frightened children, they looked like what they truly were. Royal heirs, children of destiny. The hunters paused. As if sensing the shift, Arendor lifted his staff higher, his voice rising. Then so be it. The human has chosen, and by his choice, the heirs will rise or fall. The battle raged on, but Thomas no longer fought with fear alone. He fought with a father's fire, with humanity's stubborn defiance. Every swing of his wrench, every shout, every step back into the storm of claws and shadows declared one truth. He had chosen his children, and nothing, no empire, no hunter, no galaxy would change that. And as the night wore on, one thought burned brighter than the fear in his chest. He wasn't just protecting them anymore. He was standing beside the future, and the galaxy would soon learn the cost of underestimating a human. The night burned with chaos. Thomas's small apartment, once silent and lonely, now shook like the heart of a battlefield. Hunters poured in through the broken door, their red eyes blazing, their claws slicing the air. Thomas swung his wrench again and again, every strike fueled not by skill but by desperate fire. He was bleeding, his arms heavy, but he refused to fall. Arendor stood like a tower of light, his staff flashing with bursts of alien energy. Each strike blasted hunters back, but more kept coming. Crawling like shadows through the walls, the twins pressed together behind Thomas. Their glowing eyes wide with terror, Lyra sobbed. Kale shook, but within their fear something deeper stirred. Something royal, something waiting to awaken. A hunter lunged past Thomas, claws reaching for Lyra. Thomas roared, slamming the wrench into its face. But before he could strike again, Kyle stepped forward. His small hands lifted, glowing like stars. A surge of light exploded, knocking the hunter across the room, its body crashing through the wall. Thomas froze, his breath caught. Kale stood trembling, his chest rising and falling fast. The boy's eyes blazed brighter than ever, no longer just a frightened child's eyes. They were eyes of power. Eyes of a prince. Arendor's voice rose above the battle. Do not fear your blood, young heir. Claim it, or you will lose everything. Lyra clutched Kale's arm, tears streaking her face. She whispered words in their alien tongue, words Thomas could not understand, but Kale nodded, his small jaw tight with sudden courage. He turned to Thomas, his voice breaking. Father, fight with us. Thomas's chest ached at the word father. Even in the storm of monsters, it gave him strength greater than fear. He stood taller, blood running down his face, and raised his wrench once more. "I'm not leaving your side," he said, his voice like iron. Then it happened. Lyra lifted her hands, her glowing fingers tracing patterns in the air. Symbols shimmered, the same crown she had drawn on paper again and again. They hung glowing above her head, a crest of light. The hunters hissed, recoiling as the symbol burned brighter. Arendor's golden eyes widened in awe. "The crown of Astron. It lives within them still." His voice trembled, half wonder, half relief. "The galaxy's heirs have returned." But the hunters did not flee. Their hisses grew sharper, louder. They surged forward in a frenzy, determined to snuff out the royal fire before it could rise. Thomas and Arendor fought shoulder to shoulder. Thomas swung his wrench like a hammer of survival, every strike buying the twins a second more. Arendor's staff lit the room with arcs of searing energy, but the hunters came endlessly, their red eyes glowing with hunger. Then Cale stepped forward, no longer trembling. His hands flared with burning light, a blast surging through the hunters. Lyra joined him, her crown symbol blazing brighter, her small voice rising in song-like words. Together, their powers fused. The room shook as if the walls themselves bowed to them. The hunters screamed as waves of light tore through their ranks. Their bodies dissolved into smoke, their shadows burned away. Outside, the hum of the ship above grew louder, trembling as if sensing defeat. Thomas shielded the twins, though their power glowed so fiercely it lit his face in white fire. When the last hunter fell to ash, silence crashed over the room. Only the faint hum of the enemy ship remained, circling above the city like a wounded predator. Cale collapsed to his knees, drained, his small chest heaving. Lyra sank beside him, clutching his hand, her glowing crown fading into sparks. Thomas knelt with them, pulling both into his arms. He whispered, voice breaking, "You're safe. You're safe, I swear it." Arendor lowered his staff, his face lined with tears and pride. "You have done what no one else could," he said softly. Looking at Thomas, "You stood when even kings fell. And now, the heirs live because of you. Do you understand what this means?" Thomas shook his head, exhausted. "I don't care about crowns or empires," he muttered. "I just care about them." Cale and Lyra clung tighter to him at those words for the first time since he met them. Thomas felt something shift. They weren't just children he had rescued anymore. They were his children, his family. But Arendor's voice was grave. "The galaxy will come again. The hunters will not stop. And when they do, the heirs must rise not only as children, but as rulers." Outside, the ship roared, then streaked away into the night. It had not won, but it would return with greater fury. Thomas knew the war was not over. This was only the beginning. He looked at Cale and Lyra, their small faces pressed against his chest. His body ached, his blood still dripped, but his resolve had never burned brighter. "If they want you," he whispered, his voice low, steady, and fierce, "they'll have to go through me every time." Lyra looked up, tears still on her cheeks. Her small voice whispered one word, filled with hope instead of fear: "Father." Kyle nodded, his glowing eyes shining with both exhaustion and pride. For the first time, the boy smiled, faint but real. Arendor bowed deeply, not to the heirs, but to Thomas. "Then the Astron bloodline has more than heirs. It has found its guardian, a human who chose not to surrender, but to fight." The storm outside faded. Dawn slowly painted the sky in pale light. The hunters were gone for now, the galaxy silent, but the children of a fallen empire were alive, and they were no longer alone. Thomas held them close, his heart heavy but unbroken. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, as the first rays of sunlight touched the broken apartment, he knew one thing for certain: the galaxy had heirs again, and at their side stood a human father, the man who had turned astray into royalty, and a crown of hope into a promise that could never be broken.